I'll tell you what, the free market Tea Party conservative populists are going to be absolutely furious at this one. $75 billion. $75 billion. That's how much the Obama administration has pumped into its failed mortgage modification program. I want to ask, where'd the money go? Joining us now to debate is senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and associate professor of public policy, University of Massachusetts, our friend Christian Wellen. We also have senior fellow at the Cato Institute, our friend Dan Mitchell. Happy New Year to both of you. Before we begin, gentlemen, just take a listen. We got a couple of interesting quotes here. Here's the former director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, James Lockhart, what he had to say about forgiving principal on these mortgage loans.
We need to start forgiving principal. I know it's very tough, but there's 25% of the people are now underwater in their mortgages. And if we want to keep them in their houses, we're going to have to do more than just lower their payments.
Well, the whole problem is nobody wants to forgive principal, including all these exotic sovereign wealth funds that own the mortgage-backed securities. Now, that's a plan even Barney Frank isn't so sure about. Here's what Mr. Frank said earlier today on CNBC.
I wish we would get more modifications of the principle. I think that's in the interest of everybody. But to mandate that across the board, one, I don't know what criteria you would put in to mandate it. What would we say in the law? What level of distress qualifies you? How do we prevent you from sort of getting yourself into distress? If it's voluntary, you can control that better. So no, I do not favor that.
See, I got to give that round to Barney Frank. I think he's a real smart guy, and I think he understands it. Dan Mitchell, look, the big issue here is that something like 30,000 people got modified. And Dan, $75 billion for 30,000 loan modifications. To me, this is one of the greatest outrage, even in an outrageous $800 billion stimulus package. What's your take?
Well, it's business as usual with government, whether it's $600 toilets or whether it's $75 billion for a handful of mortgages. Government overpays for everything. Government is like a bull in a china shop. And, you know, congratulations to Barney Frank. He's not totally detached from reality. He understands that if you start violating contracts and just stealing money from investors, you're going to really mess up the housing market in the long run. And I hope that the lesson we learned from this is that Bush's intervention was a bad idea and Obama's intervention is a bad idea. And maybe, just maybe, we'll finally let free markets work to fix the mess that government created.
All right, Christian, you heard Dan Mitchell, and I want to ask you, I know you're an influential policy guy in Washington, the Obama administration. What in the world did we get for $75 billion? It seems like nothing. I want my money back.
Well, the $75 billion is the money that's set aside. We have about 750,000 temporary modifications and 31,000 permanent ones. But clearly more needs to be done. And I think the current model shows that it's not working the right way, because right now the model is to kind of provide incentives to the servicers to renegotiate these mortgages. And I think in the end, what we're learning here is that this is an uneven playing field between the services, the big, heavy guns, the banks, and the desperate homeowners. And we need to tip the playing field more towards the homeowners, and that requires ultimately a rethinking and ultimately some sort of more of a stick, wielding a strong stick towards the services to force them to write down principal. You can do this through bankruptcy code regulations or reform. You can do it through the tax code. There's a number of ways you can do this.
Christian, none of this is happening. And I want to go back to this.
Well, but that's exactly the point. Like the modification process, relying on the banks to voluntarily do this, incentivizing them,
but Chris,
is not the right way.
Chris,
so I think you need to take a strong
$75 billion for 30,000 loan mods. What's the ratio? This is the worst spent money since France sold the Louisiana Purchase to Thomas Jefferson.
You're playing fast and loose in the numbers.
I'm just looking at the numbers. I'm an ordinary, humble
750,000 temporary mortgages. Yes, we could do more, but it is going in the right direction. But the main thing is that relying on voluntary modifications alone is not the right way, is not the only way. You do need to ultimately force the hand of the services in particular, and that means leveling the playing field through the bankruptcy code or through changes in the tax code.
I hear Christian's theories, but I don't see any reality whatsoever.
Well, it was part of the negotiations, and we're certainly
here's the important word. Christian kept talking about force. He's talking about the coercive power of government to violate contracts, turn America into a banana republic, and make it so that we have much less lending in the future because investors know that government can come in and pull the rug out from under them. Well, government got us into the mess. Government's not going to get us out of it.
Government didn't get us into the mess. You know
Fannie
the numbers
and Freddie
as well
and
as
the
I
Fed?
do. Well, before the crisis, during the boom years, Fannie Freddie securitized less than 10% of all new mortgages. It was a private sector problem.
Affordable lending stuff that drove the whole subprime market.
It was a private sector problem. But the main thing here is, for instance, one of the things you could do is take away some of the tax incentives for the services if they don't modify.
Let's get the government out of the business altogether.
Well, then why not take away the tax incentives?
Housing isn't mentioned in the Constitution. Get the government out of the business.
Why not just let prices work, okay?
Yes.
People have to foreclose. They're going to become renters. Meanwhile, the prices are adjusting. The government tried to stop the prices from adjusting. I think that was their first mistake. But mostly, Dan Mitchell, I want you to search for my $75 billion. You have the Capitol building right behind you in that great CNBC TV studio you're sitting in. I want the $75 billion back, Christian. And you know what, Christian? With the $75 billion back, I'm going to lower your tax rates, my friend, so you don't have to get too cold up there in Amherst, Massachusetts.
He wants higher taxes.
Right, I got to get out of here. Christian Weller, Dan Mitchell.